You started the meeting.
Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And how should we handle approval of the agenda? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion that we approve today's agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Signify by saying
Aye.
aye. Any opposed?
Is Rachel on? I don't see Rachel.
Don't see
No,
Rachel.
she's not.
Okay.
No, she won't be on.
She won't? Okay.
All right. Is William on?
I don't see him.
There's iPhone on there.
Is an iPhone?
Yeah, that's
But he didn't approve the agenda. So I have Earl, Tricia, Ingrid, and Richard for approval of the agenda, correct?
yeah. There's William. He just popped in.
Ingrid.
Yeah.
Okay.
William, do you approve the agenda?
I'm not gonna. I'm going to abstain because I do have some concerns about us possibly a full quorum.
Hmm?
Thank you.
We don't have public comments.
Okay. So we're going to third quarter financial report.
All right, Robin, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this evening, we're bringing forward the third quarter of fiscal year 21 financial summary, financial report. And the summary highlights some of the changes, our comparative information with the prior year. The first item I'd like to bring to attention is local property tax collections. At the end of the third quarter, they were reported at 93.3%. The prior year at 95%. But since then, we have received April information through April 15th, and we are currently at about 98.5%. So collections are looking very good. Revenues as a percentage of our budget, and we do expect there could be actually an excess, a small excess this year. So we are looking forward to getting those final April numbers, and we'll be talking with the board regularly through budget conversations on what those revenues are on a monthly basis. So TAN borrowings have been received and paid back as of the end of the third quarter. We will be looking to borrow, looking to do our calculations, cash flow calculations coming up very, very soon, and we'll need to submit to the board on what that borrowing will be, most likely before the end of June. So I will be coming forward sometime in June for that annual borrowing request. Additionally, the $80 million TAN that was unique to this year due to the tax bill delay, those are paid back at a specific time. Those have been received and did cover everything, all the operational costs that we had, including debt service. And they are prescribed to be paid back on or near June 30th. So we will hold those funds until right around the end of June, and then we'll make one payment back then. So those will be indicated in our fourth quarter report.
But you will close them out for this fiscal year then, before the end of the
Before the end of the fiscal year, yes. So it was a short-term debt that will not remain on our books at the end of the fiscal year. So state revenues are coming in right on the mark. It's about 2/3 or 66%, almost the same as the prior year. We do have additional E-rate funds that are federal revenue sources, and they are a little higher than this point last year. E-rate revenues are sporadic, depending on the timing of the application period from the federal government. So we did come in a little above budget on that so far this year, so that's very good news. We are entering into an application period, and those application periods are about once every 5 years. So on the expenditure side, we are reporting at about 65%, which is just slightly lower than this point last year. So as you recall, last year at March 16th, we were on closure, so that we did experience a large amount of savings last year, but it was mostly in that last quarter of the year. So up until this point, we're pretty comparable with the prior year. Then in our special revenue funds, we are experiencing a good bit more federal revenue in the CARES Act and ESSER Act funds. So that is the reasoning for the increases in those funds. And to date, we've spent about $7.7 million of those federal funds combined. So we have had, significant increase in the spending in those categories this year, particularly for PPE and technology devices for students and sanitation and other services that address learning loss. And as capital projects are up as well because of our referendum projects and the borrowings in the debt service fund as well, due to the borrowings of referendum bonds. Food service is showing a decline this year, partially because we have we were closed for a few months at the beginning of the fiscal year, then we went hybrid, then we went to mostly face-to-face with some virtual students. So the numbers of meals are significantly lower this year. So we are going to experience some lower revenues from USDA, lower expenses from payments to our contractor. But we actually do expect to receive a good profit in that category this year. We're on track to have a profitable year, which in turn will help us only even more in our replenishment. We use those profits to buy new kitchen equipment. So ovens, steamers, and other food service equipment, we just reinvest it right back into those funds. So that is a summary of the all funds quarterly report, and I'll just open it up for questions.
Can we talk about the student activities fund balance?
Yes.
Why does the district office have $660,214?
That source of funds is made up in primarily two areas, and it's the technology usage fee and the facilities usage fee. So there's about $200,000 in the facilities use fee area that has been collected as a portion of the fees that are imposed on folks that want to rent buildings, rent facilities. So those have remained pretty stagnant all year since we haven't had much activity in the space rental area. The technology usage fee has actually declined. I think we were at a point of about $1 million last quarter. And so we are using that to purchase. It is intended for replacing or repairing damaged devices, student devices or teacher devices. But we have also used it to buy some of the OtterBox cases and the carrying cases that are needed for the devices. So we're starting to utilize those funds to more regularly to draw down that balance. So we intend to, I've been pressuring technology, who's also under my direction, to make sure to bring those funds down and utilize that without borrowing additional funds.
Right. We don't want to take about 8%. We want
Absolutely.
to use this.
So we're
And really the protective stuff, that's an excellent investment for this right here, the OtterBoxes and so on. That's exactly what should be used.
So I'm closely monitoring that and talking regularly with the leadership in technology to make sure we're drawing that balance down to a more reasonable level.
And I see you've taken care of Battery Creek. Now they have a positive balance.
We have, there was a transfer of about 35,000 that was made, and it brought them from a negative balance now to a positive balance. So,
Is there any other questions on the expenditures? We look good expenditure-wise. I didn't see anybody tremendously out of variance for expenditures. I don't know what your end-of-year purchasing policy is. What guidance do you give to principals and other account managers for any balance they have left in their budget for end of year? Do you have a policy, or do you give them guidance on what they can spend it on or how they should spend it?
Typically at the beginning, at the end of the year, it really depends on where we are in the budget. So last year we froze
Yes.
because of pandemic situation. This year we have not stopped spending at this point. We do typically, about a month before, typically tell them to wrap things up, and we'll be looking at their balances to see if we need to redirect funding or of some sort for the remainder of the year. So we do monitor that on a monthly basis, and haven't sent any direction at this point this year to that effect. But they should be wrapping up their spending at this point. They know that any dollars that are spent now, but merchandise is received after July 1, will be applied to the following year's budget.
Right.
So it's based on when you take possession and put the items into use, or when the services are provided. The service is going to be provided July 15th, and you purchase it and want to spend, it's going to come out of the next year's budget. So that's an accounting rule.
Okay.
When services are provided, or the items are received and put into use. So that is an understanding that they're very aware of. And so we'll be looking to
spending stop is probably 2 weeks prior, and then at the end of the fiscal year,
yes. Oh, absolutely.
it's closed out.
Yes.
That makes sense. Any other questions? Ingrid or Earl?
No, I don't have any.
Okay. William, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any.
Okay, thank you. Nothing? You have any questions?
I do not.
So now we're going into 8%?
Well, let me ask you, does this need to have a motion from the finance committee to bring this to accept this, to recommend to the board to accept it? Or is that,
Yeah.
because this is a PE, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I was thinking to keep things clean, if maybe just the finance committee
Yes.
voted on this. What do you think?
I would recommend removing the PE language from it and just to say to accept the third quarter financial report, since the PEs technically do not exist any longer.
Right.
Earl, could you give us a motion to accept the third quarter financial statement
Okay, I make a motion that we accept the third quarter financial statement.
and recommend approval?
And you'd have to say second. So.
Yeah, I'll say second.
Okay.
Okay.
Approval or acceptance?
We're actually recommending to the full board, recommending approval. So if we could have that motion say the finance committee recommends approval of the third quarter financial statement.
Okay.
Okay.
Motion that we recommend to the full board to accept.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah. You got that, Robin?
I'm working. The finance committee recommends to the full board the acceptance of the third quarter financial report.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
David had his hand up.
David has his hand up. David?
No, I took it down. I just wanted to make it acceptance and not approval.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? You don't hear any. The motion carries. So we now can go,
Excellent.
we can go to the 8% capital budget.
William also has.
William has his, William?
William, do you have a,
I had my hand up, but y'all already went ahead and made a vote on it. But I have some questioning about this, the finance committee voting on that. I had if we were in a joint meeting, but it doesn't matter now. It's already done. Don't worry about it. It's done
Okay.
already.
all right, thank you.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is to have a discussion on the 8% capital budget. And so Ms. Crosby, did you prepare this PowerPoint? Are we going to go through this, or is this Mr. Otting? Okay. Mr. Otting.
Well, you know, I didn't know exactly the order. There's
Mhm.
several topics I want to talk about tonight that's around 8%. Kind of have my list here. One is the actual list itself as it came out of operations. We're actually on version 5, 5A and 5B.
Okay.
So, yep, you have each one of those. And I believe I can say that the operations committee is favorable on those. Is that safe?
Yes, yes. We did not take any, motion or action out of it, except for that there was no objection when we reviewed 5A and 5B. And so definitely knowing that today we're going to look at it through a different lens, we felt confident bringing this to the finance committee and having this discussion.
So, so the first thing is we want to look at the list, just so everybody has understanding of it. The second thing we'll talk about is, should I have something?
Which list am I putting this one
Oh,
up?
if you would put the one that's just the 5, version
Okay.
5. Yep, that one. I want to talk about the use of contingency funds. I know there was quite a conversation about that and how we've addressed that with this list. A conversation about the roll-up funds. One of the things the operations committee kind of tasked Tanya and her department was to look for, and actually I don't know, I think it was operations committee, how to find additional funds, for what were the other options, especially I know talking about paying for like IT equipment and electronics. So they did come up with some ideas. So one of those was the roll-up funds, another one was the E-rate funds. And then last, I'll talk about the presentation I know Mr. Geyer is interested in as far as how long to leave accounts open. So the first talk is about the actual list itself. And I think Nick Philo with CBRE here he is on as well. He can answer any questions you have on the list. He actually developed most of this. But Robin, if you would go to page 2, or the second page, which is page 12.
And Mr. Otting, just to interrupt you for a second, I just want the public and the other board members to know that are on with us today that the operations committee has looked at several versions of this 8% project list, and we've looked at it line by line.
Yes.
Okay, just want you to know it wasn't holistic. It was actually discussing each and every project that is above the red line. Okay, I want to know that.
And every board member did get a binder, I believe, and it's a different format. And I think I know this is how we want to do it going forward. And it has all the supplemental information to support the projects. And our goal is to improve this as we go forward as far as the information. So yes, any of these projects, as far as a line, it will match up to a description of it in tab 3, and then just tab 4 in the binder was only about furniture, and tab 5 was about vehicles. So with that, the concept 11, if you go to page 11, yeah, you're right there, Robin. So Ms. Fidrich mentioned above the line, below the line. That's the concept here. And this actually, some of the members from CBRE here brought it because it's being used in Charleston and some other locations in Alabama. And the concept here is that you approve everything above the line. And what you'll notice there, the total funding there is $20,772,874. Now, just know that we'll talk about those other funds because you're only going to borrow $20 million, which is the limit. So that is your project amount limit in this version, and everything above it adds up to that. And as projects are completed and any savings from those projects come back, they will go into project contingency, and everything between the black line and the red line are then available to be spent on project contingency. So that's the concept there. So you see above the line, we keep using that phrase, above the black line is, I go in the back page, it's got the list, is it 20,772,000, and below, between the black and the red, or above the red line is 25,150,788. I don't want to go in each line by line detail as far, because that's what we did in the operations committee. What I'd really like to talk about is this concept of funding, setting a funding amount above the black line, and then having a project list for project contingency below the line. So with that, are there any questions about that concept?
Well, before we get into that concept, did you look at using HVAC? We have above the line HVAC that we could possibly use the money that were coming from the federal government.
All right, so you're going to jump into the rollover fund. But
Well,
that's the 700.
We can get to that.
Oh, you're talking about the
Using that.
next round
Right.
of
The
that.
next round.
Right.
At this time, we have not. I mean, that's what we actually, as senior staff, are going to meet and discuss, and bring the HVAC projects that we're not funding with 8% to see how many of those we can fund with the next round of ESSER funds. Because we still have many needs out there. I'm
Yeah,
not
right.
concerned. And notice these are only the projects that were in the FY 2023 project list. It doesn't include 24, 25. So I'm not real concerned about being able to find HVAC projects.
If I may, in the last round of a request to build the ESSER 2 plan, Mr. Auding brought forward a listing of HVAC units he had identified. They didn't fit into the budget that, for the plan, other than the well branch middle, well branch L mold remediation. We were able to identify that amount to be able to spend that quickly. So we do have a listing of other projects that can be incorporated into the ESSER 3 plan as we're building that. So he already has identified, I think, about 4 units that are eligible for replacement, some of which may be able to fit in those funds. So he's.
And I'm actually going to task, I mean, now that there's more funding available, we can find other. There's plenty out there. I'm not worried about that.
Yeah. We had that conversation in committee. I think Ms. Boatwright's the one that asked about that. And every item that we looked at, we kept asking, can the water fountains, can the air conditioners, can any of these things be used with, especially this next group that's coming through? So I just, we did have that conversation because I think it's very valid. Yeah.
So that, and then as Tanya mentioned, the funding from the well branch, or the reimbursement for the well branch remediation, that's that 772,874. So in this plan, that amount that's over the $20 million is because in this list are the well branch projects, because they were previously approved. And now that funding is available, that funding could be brought back in here, which increases the amount. But you're still only borrowing the $20 million.
20 million, right.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay. Mr. Smith, you have a question?
No, I don't. I didn't take my hand down. That's all.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Stribinger?
Thank you. I just want to point out that there's a subtle change in the way this is being done as opposed to how it was done in previous years. And, Robert had a really nice spreadsheet that he had been using and incorporated a lot of the items. The big difference is, and it is subtle, is that the board used to approve projects being done. They would approve the project list to be done. Any money left over would be rolled forward into the next year. This changes to where the board is approving an amount to spend as opposed to the projects. And there won't be anything to roll forward. So that's kind of a subtle difference, but it's significant. And I think there is a policy that says, unused money should be rolled forward to the next year. So I'm not sure if we'd have to change that in order to implement this approach.
David, thank you for bringing it up. You're right. That was one of the things on the list that we did have to talk about, saying that on May 21st, 2019, and thank you for writing this out, Ms. Crosby, the board approved a motion to roll all unused 8% funds forward to the current bonding cycle and reduce the current bond issuance accordingly. So I don't know where.
But I think, Mr. Scrivener, and your intention was kind of to have the 20 million and lower that. What we're doing is suggesting an amount higher than 20 million and lowering that to keep your borrowing amount the same as you have in your. So it is like you'd say, a subtle difference, and that's the question, if y'all would like us to do that or not. Now that's the difference between A and B. Notice that the money that we're talking about in version 5, that's reimbursed. That's not really, well, I don't know if you call that rollover, but that's reimbursements coming back in from the federal government that we're putting back into here. So I don't know if you're calling that's a little different. Notice when we get to version 5B, that's going to be using the rollover funds from FY16 and 17 that have been closed.
Right. Some of the conversation we had was just the tremendous need that exists out there. During one of our meetings, Mr. Murphy was here, and he shared with us a little historical perspective that the limit of 20 million had been set almost a decade ago of capital improvement projects being set at 20 million, and that over time, the buildings, everything has aged. Inflation has creeped up, or the cost of products and things. So, Mr. Scrivener, you're absolutely right that it is a subtle difference, and I would like to hear a little bit more about what are your feelings about that subtle difference.
I think Ms. Boatwright has her hand up. You want to go to her first? Or?
Sure. Okay, Ingrid.
That's fine. Either way, I was just going to say, I think more or less, but to me, the board is still approved. I think the subtle difference is even more subtle in that the district is bringing more projects than we can possibly spend, and we have a spending limit. So we're still approving projects, but basically it's sort of like when you give your kid money to go, to a restaurant. Sometimes you give them more than they need, and you're like, I want my change back. And sometimes you give them all you have, and you're like, you can only spend this much money, so you got to watch, don't get soda, that type of thing. So I don't know if it's all that different, because the district is still presenting us with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects, and we're basically saying, okay, we got $20, let's pick what we absolutely have to get done. I don't think anyone's anticipating there being a lot of money left over.
David, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a subtle difference, and I like your example, Ingrid. I give my son $100 to go out to dinner. I tell him I want the change back, or I don't. And that is the difference here. We're saying we don't want the change back. I'm a little uncomfortable with that, Because I always want the change back, you know. So I'm not sure that I would oppose it, but I'm uncomfortable with it because I just feel being fiscally responsible is what we've done, and holding to 20 million each year has served us well in building up our 8% capacity. And just remind everyone, 8% is not money. This 8% is authority to borrow money. So, you know, this is money we're borrowing, which costs a little more than what we're seeing. So it's just my natural tendency to want to borrow as little as I can. And if I have money left over to roll it into the next year and have those projects prioritized along with next year's projects and see where they fall out. Because something that might be priority 25 this year when compared to the projects next year might be 27. And I think we've seen examples of that because we have stuff on here from 2014. So you know, some of this stuff has moved on and on and on and on. And an argument could be made, well, then it probably wasn't that important if it could go 7 years without being done. So that's just my gut feeling. It's just my natural tendency trying to be a fiscal conservative.
I'd like to bring up another issue, and that is millage stability. The good thing about having a set amount is that's the same millage every year. If we roll forward and we drop the millage so we don't have to borrow as much, then our millage is going to drop. And that I don't really like to see because I would rather see 8% millage on a flat line. If I start adding a curve to it, that's going to make talking to the public and saying, well, we took $2 off your bill this year and we're going to add $3 and so on. If we had a limited amount of projects, then I'd say, yeah, let's do that. But if we've got a backlog in projects, keeping millage stability to me makes some sense because we're going to have millage increases and decreases based on referendums that come up. And that's going to go up and down somewhat, but we're paying off at the same time. See, so it's a very variable issue about how you set what millage you need to pay all your debt. And I would like to see millage stability because then it's much easier for the public to say, okay, I'm paying 36.6 mils for debt service. And I'm paying 36.6 mils for debt service next year and next year. I would like ultimately, because we're going to need another referendum, I would like ultimately to say, we got another referendum, folks, and millage is going to stay the same because we're paying down and we're keeping one part stable, and that's the 8% stable. Am I saying that right?
Yes, we build a debt plan each year with our financial advisor based on a $20 million borrowing. And if we continuously lower that number, then we have a hard time justifying the millage at the rate it currently is at. So there's a possibility of reducing that millage. And certainly we don't want a fluctuation, and we would love to be able to say in the next referendum that we're not increasing taxes. So I'm constantly looking at, making sure that the debt payments are structured enough to keep us in line with the need for 36.3. So it would, I think, benefit us if we could continuously borrow as close to that $20 million mark as possible to maintain and not, as opposed to lowering that in order to maintain that, that millage rate at the level it is currently.
Another variable in this is the impact of the referendum on these lists. So that makes the variables, millage requirements, kind of going up and down like that, and the payoff, because it's short term, you know, our 8% is short term, 5 years. Okay, so it's a balancing act to keep the millage about the same. And again, if we didn't have a whole lot of projects that weren't backlogged, we wouldn't do that. We would go ahead and borrow less. But since we have all these, the stability makes some sense to me in how we package future bond referendums.
So if I'm understanding you correctly then, in order to maintain that stability, the board policy of reducing the current bond issuance accordingly based on how much savings are put back is problematic.
Well, actually,
Is that what I'm hearing you say?
that's what we're doing, because we are following that, but we're, instead of recommending 20 million, we're recommending more than 20 million, and you're reducing it down to the 20 million with that savings.
Right, right.
So
Yes.
I think that
Right.
follows
Same thing.
the board policy. Now, that may not be exactly what the intent, like
Right,
Scrivener thinks
that's
the
my
intent
point,
is.
yeah.
But I mean, the way, well, I was hesitant at first, because when I read it over and over, I'm like, well, we do. Because when you look at what it says specifically, I mean, it says roll all unused 8% forward to the current bonding cycle and reduce the current bond issuance accordingly. Nowhere does it say you have to borrow, only have $20 million in projects. So if you're borrowing, if you're going more than $20 million in projects and using that to bring it down, you are doing what it is saying, what your policy says. That is my interpretation. So I will leave that up to y'all's discussion. But that's the intent of what we did here.
Okay. Ms. Boatright?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two conversations going on. One, how do we pay for all this, right? But then from what we've talked about in operations a little bit and looking at the need, so we've had this 20 million cap for 10 years, right? We've added schools, we've added network infrastructure, which initially took up 25% of this budget. We trimmed that down a little bit. So I think that we can't stay at 20 million forever. We're going to have to look as we build new buildings and we build out capacity, and we upgrade our networks and we do all these things. And we also have a lot of this is mandatory. The painting, resurfacing of tennis courts, the buying of band uniforms, that's non-negotiable, right? So we get every year, it seems like when I'm looking at past years, we're getting a smaller and smaller amount of money. And I think if you're looking at the referendum, there's two ways to look at it. One is going to be the fiscally conservative way that's going to come in and say, I want you guys to do as little as possible, cost me as little as possible. But the other part of the referendum is there are going to be people who look at this and like, our schools are run down, they're dirty, they've got all these problems, we've got a lot of deferred maintenance on them. Why am I going to vote them another $100 and some million? I think that we have to commit to maintaining the buildings that we have. That's just as important as being fiscally conservative. And I think that we can make that argument even to taxpayers who, feel like they don't use the school system. All my neighbors who are retirees around here who moved here late in life, to say, if they're going to vote yes to give us another referendum, but when they see the schools or they hear about the schools and the schools are in disrepair some of these projects on here, cracked walls, abandoned water tanks, that kind of stuff, it doesn't look like we're taking care of it. So I think that we have to look at it from both angles. And from my point of view, I would rather see us be a little less fiscally conservative with a little more eyes to maintaining what we're building.
Mr. Smith?
What I was going to say is that I definitely agree with what Mr. Scribner just said, along the lines of
Join the meeting.
Just a lot of what he said, as well as I even go as far as to I think that was a great way that Mrs. Boatwright used the basically the equation of her son going to the store. But my problem along the lines is that I think that the money is allocated towards something, that money to be returned, and we need to come back to the table and we decide where that money goes at, or what is done with that money. Because past presidents, we've found money, and I just don't think that I would want that to happen again. So I think that it's very important that come back and then we have a conversation about what we do with that money and move from there. As well as I think that I hear what Mrs. Boatwright is saying about the 20 million. But I think for right now, due to the pandemic, I think that this conversation probably could be a later conversation. But I think at this time, it probably would be safer and more. We would show the people that we care about their money to keep it at 20 right now to understand where we got and what we got going on. Thank you.
So if I can, if I can continue Ms. Boatwright's analogy, what we did here is you said, all right, you gave $20 for dinner, and when you get to keep the change, but these are the only things you can spend that change on. Because recognize what we're saying here is that your $20 million roughly in projects is above the black line. Any change you get back, you can only spend on between the black and the red. So we've already listed out where your change is going to go. We've already told you. And one of the examples here is furniture, where we have the last furniture assessment we did was tab 4. And at our current rate of funding for furniture, we're replacing our furniture once every 120 years. So, and that's at about $250,000. It would take $2 million to fund it once every 15 years on a replacement cycle. So that's what we put in here was $2 million. I don't think there's any way our change is going to give us $2 million for furniture. We funded above the black line $239,000 in furniture replacements, and that's in that above once every 100-year replacement cycle. So, in your change, one of the things we're saying you can spend it on is furniture, and recognize it. To Mr. Smith's point, we've already listed exactly what we can spend it on. And the good thing when we get to the discussion here a little bit later about time to spend money, we've got some things listed here like furniture. That doesn't have to be designed. It's an exact cost. It's easy and it's quick. And so are relatively quick, unfortunately. So are vehicles, so are some of the other things here so with that change, we don't have necessary full projects. We have items that can be purchased, and you know what those are. And that's why we've got our vehicle replacement cycle back here. And we typically are trying to buy 4 to 5 vehicles a year, and that puts us on a 10-year replacement cycle on vehicles. So, and we have our list there, and you're looking at vehicles that are approaching 200,000 miles on them and are well over 10 years old. So that's our attempt here, is to try to give you a project list for your change, to use the analogy.
And I greatly support this, this list. I think it's been very vetted through the operations committee. My only question is this, okay? If we were to go, can we use the unused 8% funds to do more of our list, but not exceed the 20 million? Or does board policy say that we have to take that $493,106 and reduce the borrowing? To me, that's how I read that motion. And so,
again, I think you keep it, you don't reduce it, you push that $400,000 down your list, and
I agree.
And you pay for what's next on the list.
Mm-hmm.
And if something is more than that, then you go down to where you can, well, like the painting or something like that, that will fit in.
Right.
Rather than try to, I don't like the roller coaster piece.
I hear you. I'm just trying to make sure we adhere to
Yeah.
the policy.
Yeah, understand.
You know,
Understand.
and maybe the interpretation of the policy is not the same for everybody. I'm not sure.
I really think we need to take a strategic look at this list and think of what you want to do. What if you were looking ahead 5, 10 years? Are we where we should be, and how we're going to fund? I mean, we're going to have another referendum.
I know.
And so what can wait till we get the next referendum that's on this list?
Right. And we did that. We pushed
Yeah.
some things.
Yeah.
Parking lots.
We
Parking
did.
lots,
We
yeah,
pushed
yeah,
some
right.
things.
I understand. Understand.
you know.
And if we're doing that,
Right.
but I'm also look at your strategic millage rate.
Mm-hmm.
What's your millage rate that you're going to be charging?
Yeah.
And you know there's natural inflation in your millage rate because it's a percentage of the value, and the value we can expect house values and property values to go. So there's inflation built into a stable millage rate.
Mm-hmm. David?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to argue any more the point. Everybody knows my point on that one. But explain to me, if you will, what we're going to do with the change in line 154, which is a TBD.
Okay. So, well, you're looking at, yes, you're looking at the Plan 5B, but we put that in there, or that was a request. I don't think we have an A, do we?
I don't think it,
So one of the concerns was having funding available for land. And so we don't have a piece of land right now that we know of that we're interested in purchasing. And we don't know, and also we don't want to expose how much money we have for land purchasing. So this means that if you do have money left over from projects, that could go towards land purchases, land assessment, things of that nature. So an example, it's probably not going to be enough to fund land, but you could combine it with, say, the funding left over from Burroughs Avenue and this, and may have enough for a piece of land. So it just gives you that option. If it's a large piece of land, you're going to have to bring it back to the board and ask for additional 8% borrowing or something like that, because you're most likely not going to have enough funding there. But there was, and Ms. Fidrich, I know there's been a request to have something there for land, so that's why we put it there.
right. This has been one of my big concerns is we know we're going to have to purchase land, and by just including it on this list, it's kind of insight in mind. That was the entire purpose of doing this. And as Robert explained, we kind of bandied about a little bit, well, what number goes in there? Well, we don't want to put a number in there. We don't want to play our hand. We don't want to even assign a value right there. We just need to know that that is something, you know, perhaps it might be a referendum item, perhaps it's not, but it's something to keep in mind that is desperately going to be needed.
But I would like, but just recognize we can't, it's not giving us a blank check or anything.
No,
It's only
no.
the change that could go towards that. I mean, for whatever we put in project contingency after we finish the projects above the block line, that's the only thing that can go towards that. So there's no blank check here. It's just, if the opportunity's there and you have some funding, you could put it towards that. Is that it? Is that understandable, Mr. Scrivener?
Yeah, I mean, that's understandable. I just, when we say it's a 25 million and we're going to, and then we have a TBD, I understand why it's a
Yeah.
TBD, but, that 25 is kind of, I understand.
Right.
I'm not going to argue it anymore. I can go with it.
Okay. Ingrid?
Yeah, it's tricky because I was kind of responding to something else, but I think one concern I have is that I hear a lot about this second referendum, which, as I understand it, would be something we would look at after this one's completed in 2+ years, right? Or roughly 2 years or so. And then we haven't had a great track record of getting referendums approved. And I know that we're, in a much better place than we were when the previous referendums have gotten approved. But I don't know, I worry a little bit about us sort of putting a lot of stuff off because we're going to get it done in the next referendum. That's not a foregone conclusion. So, and it's, again, I know the Hilton Head schools very well, right? So I'm not Hilton Head centric, but I just know one of the schools they talk about is Hilton Head High getting in the next referendum. But we can't indefinitely put off like air conditioning and roofing and things that, make the school functional, because at some point down the road, we're hopeful about a referendum. So I just want to say, I don't think we should totally put that in the bank.
Yeah, well, there's another issue too. We know the citizens-led committee that went out and looked at our district said there was over $600 million worth of projects, major capital projects that needed to be done. But of course, we couldn't put $600 million on one referendum. The thought was that we will split it in half and take care of our immediate needs. And then we knew that we were going to have to build extensions on 2 schools very quickly. So we anticipated passing the referendum, and we used 8% money to do the design work so that we were shovel ready as soon as the referendum passed. And I got to tell you folks, we're going to have to build something in Bluffton in the next 3 to 4 years. I mean, build it for kids inside it in 3 to 4 years, given what we've been told just recently about the growth in Bluffton. So, that's another piece that we've got to look at, not only land, but also design, so that because we're going to have to meet an immediate response in Bluffton. There's just no doubt about that. And it's just a matter of where and what type of school it's going to be, where is it going to go? Is it going to be able to be built at May River or whatever? But we have to have another referendum. I know we don't want to talk about it, but there is no way we're going to be building another school with 8% money like we did with May River.
Right. But that goes to my point too. Yes, we need another referendum, but then who knows what's going to go on it? Because by the time we get around to another referendum, we might be building multiple schools, and it's going to be hard to put some of this, the paving, and those sort of things in that referendum. I just think we've got some explosive growth going on in the Bluffton area, and in Beaufort County as a whole. And that's one of my concerns too with this 20 million, and then I'll get off of this. This $20 million cap it seems like it was for maintenance. And now we also had $5 million, which we've reduced down for network equipment. And we want to do a buildings assessment, and we want to do design work. You keep shrinking that pot until you only have a few $1 million a year for 32 schools plus district buildings. And this area is expensive, right? And costs are going up dramatically. And hopefully that is a short-term spike. But I mean, trying to build right now is an expensive endeavor. So that's why I say I worry about trying to just look at this strictly from a fiscally conservative standpoint, because like we talked about teacher salary over 10 years, we've had this cap, our salary hasn't kept pace, our schools have kind of deteriorated. And if we're going to move these schools up and get them back up to where they were, we're going to have to convince the good people of Beaufort County to be more generous with the school district. I don't think we're going to convince them by, cutting projects. Thanks for letting me butt in. It's hard to sit here patiently with my hand up.
Yeah. So basically, we looked at 2 different versions.
I have my hand up.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Smith. Go ahead, please.
Actually, I would just say that Mrs. Boatwright said some of what I was going to say about the so many different things coming out of this pot, and maybe we also need to reconfigure what's supposed to come out of this pot of money, and what is it designed for? Because I am kind of concerned that we are pulling things out of here. We're adding things to this pot that $20,000 probably was not designed for. So that is a very valid discussion when it comes to that. And as well as I'm aligning with, we can't continue saying that we have to have another referendum. We have to have another referendum, and we're having these large items that are waiting on a referendum, because basically it's like you telling the baby that you're going to feed him, but are you going to stop him until you figure it's necessary to feed the baby if the kid is hungry? So I mean, that is a serious concern of mine as well, because sitting at that table making those decisions or listening to things that need to be done, and keep hearing that, oh, well, we probably have to go win on a referendum, or we probably have to win a referendum, but some of those are serious needs, and we can't say that, oh, they're so big, so we have to have a referendum. The same thing with Lazar Middle School. Lazar Middle School need a new school, so they said, well, you might want to wait for a referendum, or there are different things in the school to be fixed. So now you're saying, should I fix a whole bunch of stuff in the school, like Beautiful the L, fix up half the school, kind of renovate it, or should we just go ahead and put a whole school on the referendum, or should we just fix up half the stuff in there? So you kind of tied between fixing things up in the school or holding off on them because you're trying to actually get the school on a referendum. So basically, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. So
Right.
that's I do strongly agree with that, and that is something that we may need to readjust, or we may need to take a look at and see what actually goes in that $20,000. Thank you. I mean, excuse me, not $20,000. Excuse me.
Right,
Thank
okay. Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Otting, the next step then is
Well, so I think you're about to talk about, we looked at the two versions. So version A that we just kind of talked about, just brought back the funding for Well Branch that we're planning on getting reimbursed. The 5B version actually brings in that 493,000. We're kind of debating about now on whether it should go in, and that's why if you look at 5B that's in the orange, the additional project between 5 and 5B are those ones in the orange, and the total amount in 5B is $21,265,980. So that 21 million comes by adding in the 493,106 and by also adding in the 772,874. So those are the mold remediation funds being put back in, and then rolling up the funds from us closing FY 2016 and FY 2017. So that's the debate that y'all are right now having. I think the operations committee, if I can say that the feeling was they support both of these. It's whether or not people support rolling up those funds into FY 2023.
yes. So
And
that's where I thought we were going next. And so that's really kind of the decision. In order to move forward and talk about other things, we need to decide which version, correct?
correct.
Okay.
Well, that's my suggestion.
Yeah, that's how I saw things playing out.
Question is, which version do you recommend to the full board for the most part?
So I will go first and just suggest that I think that it should be version B. I think that using these funds, obviously the reimbursement for the mold to me seems like it should happen that way. That is not going against any kind of board policy. So absolutely for that. The unused 8% funds, I sincerely and highly respect Mr. Stribinger and see where he's going with the subtle difference, but it makes sense to me to start chipping away at this large list that we have. So I am in support of 5B. Mr. Smith, Ms. Boatright, either of you?
I support 5B. I think for all the reasons I've already hammered
Right.
on about.
Okay. And we really wanted finance committee to look at it and just give us your opinion, which Mr. Colonel Guyer, you pretty much have.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go. 5B.
Okay.
Makes sense to me.
Mhm.
What do you think, Earl?
I don't have a problem with it. It's fine with me.
Thank you, sir. Okay. So
All right.
you would like the operations committee members to make a motion to bring version 5B to the full board.
Correct.
So do I have an operations committee member that would be willing to do so?
Yes, I move that we bring version 5B of the 8% project list to the full board. Is that enough verbiage? Because we're a quorum, so we can't accept or approve it, right? We're just bringing it for,
Right. And if we just do it for the operations committee, then it, I see that
Okay, so-
Mr. Smith is not on, so I'm going to second it. Any more discussion about it? Right. Operations committee, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, unanimous. All right, step 2.
Yeah, so I guess what we did there, and I guess also the question was in this format. So we kind of addressed the use of contingency and the roll-up funds. The next thing we kind of want to talk about is the E-rate funds. So what we did here is we originally had a budget for network electronics in the amount, I don't remember the exact amount, it was 5
It
million
was.
and something.
Mhm.
And so finance, Ms. Boatwright challenged us to find other ways to fund the technology, and that's where finance made the suggestion of using the E-rate funds, reimbursed funds, in the amount they feel comfortable with $1.6 million going towards that. So we will need if everybody's in agreement, and that's the way this was formatted, was to use those E-rate funds. We will need a motion to use the $1.6 million of E-rate funds in front of the board. I don't know if you want to make that at this time or wait till you're in front of the full board, but that's how this is designed. And so that's part of it. Any questions about that?
We had this conversation, yeah, we did. We talked about this at length too. And like Mr. Odding said, Ms. Boatwright said, what other monies can we use? And so this is bringing this down to 3.6.
Well, can I pop in just on
Please
that
do.
point?
Sure.
Because Mr. Schriberger will probably have a response to this as well, because I think it's weird that we charge the budget. We have $20 million to spend, right, on this $100 and some million project list. And what I noticed was that if we do $5 million and we're anticipating getting 2.8 back, Tanya, from that 5 million.
Yes.
I know we have just an estimate and it's 18 months away, but in other words, we're charging the budget $5 million for what is ultimately only going to cost us $2.2 million. So to me, this, like I said, I've talked about this a little bit. I've looked at other schools and they have a capital IT budget and it's separate because it's a different kind of beast and it has E-rate funding. But I don't think that we should take $5 million out of that pot if we know ultimately it's only going to cost us 2.2 million. Ish.
Yeah. So from the finance point of view,
Makes sense to me.
and Ms. Crosby, I know that you provided us with this information. I don't know if that meant confirmation and approval of it or just information. So any more thoughts on it?
Yes. So I think my only concern is that if $3.6 million are included in the approval of these projects, we'll need to have a motion for approval of the 1.6 million to spend the remainder of the projects as well. So with the E-rate funds. So I just want to make sure that we capture and are allowed, have approval to spend the entire amount, but with two different funding sources. So that's my only concern.
Right. So have a motion to have the E-rate reimbursement of $1.6 million to be used. Is that how you want
Yes,
it to be
yes.
used?
Mr. Auding has some.
Well, I'm
drafts and
working on one. I
motions.
wanted
Okay.
to go through Tanya and Wendy, and I'd have it probably finalized by
Tuesday
Tuesday.
night?
So I think if you made a simple motion, or, well, I mean, you can see the motion, have it if you want. Is that what you think we should go forward?
No, I don't
with?
think we have to do it here. I think we could do it Tuesday night.
Okay,
But having a conversation here so that,
Yes, and then we would just identify specific schools or projects that would lead up to those amounts, code them each to the respective funding sources and keep them separate that way.
okay?
Mhm.
All right, and then,
David had his hand up.
please, David?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's going to be important to combine those two motions, because if the board is voting on 5B, they need to know that that's only valid if they have a second part, which is the E-rate funding, right? I mean, it's not valid if you don't get that. So you might want to think about making it one motion so that that connection is quite clear.
okay,
All right, good idea. Thank you for that.
work on that.
Okay. All right, so the next part is.
The next part is, Burroughs, yes, yes, we can go to Burroughs Avenue. So the, as Ms. Boatright said earlier, we had building assessments in here, which suggestions were made that, to try to find another source other than 8% to fund that. These building assessments have multiple needs, but one of the things is it's leading up to the next referendum to know what projects and have a third party look at our building needs. It's something I know we haven't done in this district since 2011, so it's more than time for that to happen. Everything we've done to date has been internal staff doing that work. So one of the things that was suggested was to use the funding that we received, not funding, but funds from the sale of Burroughs Avenue. There was some conversation back and forth about could we reduce the amount of buildings that we looked at. So the original amount was the 875,000. I believe we reduced that down to 630. Yeah, and that was done by taking off May River, River Ridge Academy, Battery Creek High School, Hilton Head Middle School, Hilton Head High School, and Robert Smalls, all the projects that are, major renovations that are going on right now. And I think even Buford Elementary School. So the one thing is, I haven't had the chance yet to look at, I would like to bring some of those back, not as a full assessment, but as a schedule of maintenance, of large maintenance projects. In other words, look at all those big projects such as May River, put the roof in there, put the HVAC, just as general timing in there. So I do want to go back and look at adding those. So I would like to do a motion that would allow us to use the capital funds from the sale of Burroughs Avenue in an amount not to exceed that 875. It's going to fall somewhere closer to the 630, but it'd be between the 630,000 and the 630, right?
I think it was 639
Okay.
something.
639 and the 875.
Yeah, it's right here, because we did have that conversation about taking off some of those newer schools. Why would we need that? But then Robert, I thought, made a good point. Well, first of all, having the assessment in the first place by a third party. I think that makes a lot of sense. Somebody coming in and taking a look at all the buildings that we have and giving an objective view of what's needed, and then developing that maintenance schedule. So it was 639, and so you were asking for not to exceed 875.
Yes. And the use of the big question in finance there also is the use of Burroughs at the sale of funds from the sale of Burroughs Avenue for that purpose, and what the feeling is there.
I thought we passed a motion when we sold that property that proceeds were going to be put in the bank, so to speak, for land purchase.
There was some discussion of that, but the actual verbiage is just for a capital projects account.
Is this a capital projects account?
I pulled up the motion August 2020 I move that the Beaufort County Board of Education direct the administration to deposit the proceeds of the sale of the borough's property in the district's capital project funds.
So it could be used for that purpose, but there are other
I
capital.
understand. No, I just want to make sure that we weren't.
Yeah,
I-
and the sale
Makes
was,
sense.
I mean, this does not take up all the dollars from the sale.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, about 2/3.
If it's 600,000,
Oh,
the total
yes.
sale amount was 1,275,000.
Okay. So if it's the 6 versus if it's the 8, right? Anybody's hands up, Molly? Any comments regarding this?
I wasn't there when y'all made the motion, so I don't know what the intention was, but I would like to, I think it's a good use of the sale of that property. Because it's not, we're going to need to buy some land, but we're going to need more money.
All right, so that we'll be looking for, if there are no other.
I don't see any other hands up.
So, I mean, I guess the assessment was one thing we thought was needed. We found another funding source, so we'll be looking. I don't know if we'd want to put that all in one motion or have that as a separate motion.
I would recommend so.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to raise my hand.
Okay, go ahead, Ingrid.
Okay, sorry. I missed being there. Couldn't we just take that out entirely out of this and say, and not make an 8% project? Or do you think that would jeopardize it?
No,
If we don't type.
We've actually done that. We took it out.
Yeah.
It's actually we put it in the remove column. So
Right,
if
so
you
could we
notice-
just make a motion that says we'd like to use, an amount not to exceed of the borough's money and just make a simple motion like that?
That's
Okay.
exactly what we're talking about.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I thought maybe we were trying to make it complicated.
No, it would be complicated if we made it all in one motion, but as Tanya said, it probably is better suited to be a second motion, and it's.
I just
simpler.
wonder, the reason I thought maybe we were trying to make it more complicated sort of is that if as a standalone, if it would have less support. Because
Correct.
the intent was to take it out to free up, find another source of funding for it. So we'd have more money available for, the 8% projects. So do you think that it would make it more of at risk, at standalone sort of coming out of there? Tanya, I think.
If I may, I'm picturing when we will actually get the assessment and a dollar amount, a quote from a vendor. We're going to need to come back to the board for approval of a contract because it's going to exceed the board's threshold of
Correct.
489,000.
Right.
We could just wait until then.
Correct.
If you're going to need to approve it, we could say that it's with the Burroughs Avenue proceeds at that time.
Yes, the reason is, as Ms. Boatwright said, that was part of our decision on how we developed this 8% list. So it's kind of put a bow around it. But yes, we will have to come back. Whenever we get that contract.
We do it once.
I think the whole board needs to know that. I hadn't heard about using that before, so I think the whole board needs to hear about that to see. Makes sense to me, but I think just to inform them.
Yeah.
You may not need a motion because you've already got the flexibility since it's in there for capital projects.
Right. So I could just in my report say that will be coming in front of the full board for, at a later time.
But to the same extent, if people are greatly against it, there's no reason for us to go out and formalize the assessment contract.
I think that could be the discussion in your report. Is there anybody that has objection to that?
Yeah.
And if we get the Kiwi, everybody saying okay, then off you go.
Yeah.
All right.
And I do think, sorry, I'm not raising my hand, but just to jump in, I do think that when you make your report to say that this was something that the operations committee identified as a need for an 8%, but wanted to, free up just so that they understand that it was, kind of a sacrifice on Mr. Otting's part to take it out of that. There was some, yeah.
Okay. All right. Good suggestion. Thank you. Okay.
All right. The last item, Robin, if you could pull up the presentation. the PowerPoint, the Joint Operations Finance Committee. All right, so this is, I'd like to discuss how we close out projects and how we've done them in the past for the most part. So I kind of made this 8% transparency manifesto. These were the things I'm trying to accomplish at the page. Since I have the same slide. So my goals, you can call it goals. We need to make it where the board and the public shall understand everything that's purchased. You know, that everything must be able to be tracked, must be transparent. We got to follow the procurement rules. We need to understand the time frames, and we need to understand how we select the projects and then how we prioritize them. That's kind of this whole process, but that's my goal. So if you go to the next slide. So the next slide shows just how we have spent the money that we've been given to us in 8%. Our goal now, is the $20 million, and for the most part, what I'm trying to do, and as we showed you before, is to spend all of it. And actually, in the past, we've had a pretty good track record at that. As you see, we haven't gone over except for that 0.55, and I think that's a rounding error. But we're in the 98, 97, 99% of what we're spending. But the way we are set up, if you'll go to the next slide, is we're not spending it in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Our average now to get close to 100% has been 7 years. We're going back all the way to 2011. And what I'm showing you there on the right, and you'll have to look at the paper copy because I know it's probably hard to see. Robin, can you blow that up just a little bit in case people don't have paper copies? Yep, perfect, thank you. So the column on the left is the year of the account, I guess you'd say, and then along the top are all the fiscal years that the money was spent. So if you look at the top one, which is 2011, you can see it was spent all the way from fiscal year 2009, 2010, all the way up to 2016, 17. So that was a 7-year period and I know you don't like it, but what I'm showing you is what we've done in the past, so how we are built. And then when you get down to those in green, those are the ones that currently are still open. We're still spending out of those accounts. Those have not been closed as of yet, or those projects have not been finished. So what I'm trying to do is work from a 7-year expenditure, for the most part, down to a 5. If you go to the next slide, and the way we are built, there's a reason for this. And so you see there the percentage that we're spending of the fund each year, and the highest year of expenditure right now is the 3rd year. Part of that is because you're approving it right now. So this year, the only money we're going to spend is technology and design. And that's where you're seeing, technology can go out and buy their equipment as soon as y'all approve it, they'll go out and buy the next year's amount of equipment. And then we select on the project side, we'll select our architects and start our design work in the fall. Now that stuff's approved, have it lined up for the summer, which is actually year 2. And we'll really start that work in year 2. And unfortunately, most of those projects, we don't close out till almost the next summer. And the bulk of it's finished. There's a substantial completion date is typically in August. A lot of times final completion, depending on the project, will run till December. Now that is something we need to work on tightening up. We're constantly working on tightening that up. And then the closeout time runs into spring, and it's something we're pushing to tighten that time frame up. But that money actually doesn't come back until almost year 3. And when I say money come back, what I'm talking about really is the contingency funds. The way we're set up with a 5% contingency on every project. So by the year 3, we may get that money back from the fund. well, we will get it, but it'll be almost year 3 before those funds come back. And then that is spent kind of, as you see, on other items such as vehicles, furniture, and things of that nature. And then some of the projects take 2 years. We've had some roofing projects and a lot of others. So you're really not closing out a 2-year project till year 4. And that's what you're seeing there is your percentage is really dropping off by year 5, 6, and 7. Then you're kind of using your change on other projects that are on the list, such as furniture, because we have an endless need, as you see, for things like furniture or things or vehicles or things of that nature. So I want to show you that's how we're functioning today. And if you go to the next slide. One more. And actually, that just kind of summarizes what I just went over. But so our goal and what I would like to make our goal is to close them out in 5 years. And now that you have those below the line projects, as we kind of talked about, that's what we'll probably be spending the money on in year 4 and 5. And but we cannot go over that cap that you've set on it. So really in year 4 or 5 is when we're, in our analogy, spending the change on furniture and vehicles and land if it comes up or something of that nature. So that is what I'm presenting. I'd like to do a motion. Well, I'll stop there.
If you were working for General Motors and you said that, you would not be working for them long.
Understood.
Or any other major corporation. When you have closeout, you have closeout. When you take occupancy, when the HVAC is put in there and the user turns it on, you close out. Now, there's always punch list, there's always warranty and other things like that. But I understand the 2 years. I can understand the 3 years. 4 years, you know, that's a management issue to me. That we're not expecting this to be done. Now, there's going to be exceptions. You know, there's going to be exceptions. There could be big roofing projects. I can understand that. But the standard 4 years, industry-wise, is not acceptable. They will not keep money tied up in a project like that. You get it done, you close it out, and we get to work. So I find it very hard to understand that. And if on this referendum, you better be closing them out.
No, we're on track.
Yes.
And that's why we track. If you'll notice, we make a big effort to look at how we're tracking our expenditures. Because if we get off track on that, we're not going to meet that 4 years.
Exactly.
And that's a different animal. And I think for right now, we're on track with that, and we're doing everything we can to stay on track.
Well, I am. What do you think, David? What's your experience?
I agree with what you're saying, Dick. If you can't close it out in about 3 years, but then, you know, I'm coming from a different background than education. But if you can't close it out in 3 years, you got a management issue. You're just not managing the project properly. And a lot of times you have to take that money and get it reauthorized. And that's, you know, from an optics point of view, you don't want people to think that you are fluffing up project expenses so that you have a little slush fund. And unfortunately, that when you don't close them out quickly or fairly quickly, that's kind of what it looks like. So that's kind of something to avoid. So I'd suggest we have a, you know, I can go with 4 years based on your explanation, Robert, but then we need to close them out. And if there's stuff left over, then it needs to come back to the board and say, look, this is stuff we didn't get done. And then we can analyze that from a lessons learned point of view.
I mean, if I could say, one of the differences is, most of this work is summer work. So we have 10 weeks to get it done. I mean, that we work all year prepping for summer. And if you don't get it in this summer is unprecedented. This one's going to be very hard to get a lot done, a lot of this stuff done. But in a normal summer, with those 10 weeks, that's our shot to get it done. And then we wait for the next summer if you don't get it, if you're not able to complete it. But I understand your concerns, and I want to address them. That's why we're having this conversation.
Ingrid?
Thanks, mine. Yeah, I was going to make that same comment, Robert, because you and I talked about this a little bit in terms of it's hard because it's different than schools are different than GM, right? Because you're trying to do all this construction around little kids and 400 government regulations, and so I agree with Colonel Geyer and Mr. Stribinger that it would be its optics are very important, I think, especially as we look at, I really am hoping that as Dr. Rodriguez gets, COVID behind him and really gets established here in the district, that he's going to have great plans, and I want to fund them, right? So I want to convince everybody that the schools are a worthy investment. So optics, I think, are important. So to that end, I totally agree with Colonel Geyer and Mr. Stribinger and would support their expertise because this is not my field. What I will say, the one caution I have is that a lot of times, this is sort of a common theme in both education and healthcare, is that people in private industry come in and say, well, if you ran your business like this, you'd be out of business. It's different because these are totally different animals, right? There's a tremendous human impact. There's government regulations. And so when you start looking at cost benefit and, trying to compare how GE does, I think we need to have a little, not compassion, a little bit of slack in the system for the fact that this is just a very different beast. Because I do think that we've gotten into a lot of trouble in this country, I think, over the last couple of decades, where people come in and they're like, well, I'm going to run this like a business. And schools are not a business. And healthcare is not a business. And it's all fine and good to talk about, cost benefit analysis until you're the one that needs, surgery or chemotherapy. So I agree with them, but I also want to caution, I think that we have to be aware that this is a different sort of venue.
I ran a school, federal government. I had a year for design. I had a year for construction. And, I had to deal with that. And, and I closed that out. And I had to put students other places while construction was going on. I know it's difficult, but project management, I think you're learning a lot by this referendum. And if I was to take this and show this to our chair and say, this is what we're doing on 8% money, you've been running Coca-Cola, and I understand it's not schools, but I think he would tell you the same thing. He would. You got to find a way to close out. And it's, I can see the 4 years. I can see 4 years. It hurts me, but I can see 4 years. But 5th, 6th, and 7th, that's a stretch for me. That's just a stretch for me. And if you have to keep doing those little things that long for that little bit of money, but a little bit of money adds up. I just.
Well, to be honest, I think this new process of kind of having a list below the line will assist us in spending it faster, to be quite honest. So I
can see that.
I was hopeful for 5, but I will work towards 4. I mean, if everybody's in agreement, I can.
There's going to be exceptions.
Yep.
I mean, there's going to be exceptions, but that's a reasonable goal And if you have to make an exception, justify the exception and it goes for next year.
Well, that's kind of what I was, and I don't know if you'd want to do it, have it spelled out in a motion, or just have it as the way we would do it, that we would do it in 4 years, and if not, we'd have to bring it back to the board.
I think it's an operational explanation. So.
Okay.
So
So-
if it's an operational expectation, does that go to policy or does that come as a motion?
I was just going to say that might be an interesting thing to bring up and ask for it to be sent to the policy committee versus a motion out of operations committee. Actually, the operations committee could make request of the board to have it sent to the policy committee.
That's just what I was gonna say.
Yeah. So, so operations committee members, do you want to go ahead and make a motion to have the operations committee bring forward to the board a request to send that to policy?
Can I ask that we hear from Mr. Stribinger before we make a motion, just because I think he was trying to jump in.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, David.
Thank you. I was trying to jump in. I'm on the policy committee, and I'd prefer that you just have the board make a motion and not wait for the policy committee. And then if the policy committee thinks that it should be reworded, they can do that. But then it takes effect right away. And the policy committee doesn't have to worry about the will of the board. The will of the board has already been expressed. So it just makes it easier and it's much quicker.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you again for that. Then let's do it that way.
Yeah.
Right.
I think he's right. I do think the will of the board needs to come first.
Yes.
So are we making a motion then just to bring this discussion before the board, or are we making a recommendation of 4 years before the board? Because I can be on board with 4 years. If Mr. Awning's on board with 4 years, I'm definitely on board with 4 years. Like I said, I support what Colonel Guy or Mr. Stribinger are saying as far as closing out. So what do we need to do here?
Well, I think I would feel more comfortable with a motion being made in ops committee to then bring that to the full board.
Okay.
So Mr. Smith or Ms. Boatright, would you like to make a motion to that end?
Actually, I had my hand up. I had a question before that, but I was waiting to get called on.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith. I have trouble with keeping track of the electronic hands here, and I can't see your face on Zoom. So go ahead, please.
Well, I was wondering, was it going to be like my question was what the past practices of Buford L, like how they're doing right now, as in remodeling right now, and even though the students aren't there. My question was to Mr. Scrivener, would it be along the timeline or something? I mean, not Mr. Scrivener, Mr. Outing, along the timeline or something like that?
Well, I mean, Buford L is a referendum project. Yeah, and it has to be done in the 4 years. And we started on it as soon as the referendum passed back in December of 19, or let's just say January to round it up, of 20. So we're right now in year, we're in year 2, and we're going to finish this fall. So it's going to take us about 2 years to finish that. Does that answer your question, Mr. Smith?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that does. Yeah.
Man, does anybody have his hand up?
Go ahead.
If I could, I see Tanya over there looking at the quarterly financial report, which what makes me think looking for what the impact is, and it does make me question what the impact is on current projects and funding. So I would request, however it's made, that either it starts with FY 2023 or it starts after a year or something like that, just so we may have intention to use some money out there that all of a sudden you just slam the door on. So that's
Yeah,
just
it's a
a
good point.
request,
Yep.
if I could.
So what I was looking at is what does open projects mean? Is open once the bonds are issued and closed and we have cash in hand to begin the 2023 projects, for example? What does open projects mean? So right now we have 2023 projects for the Well Branch project, mold remediation projects, but there were no funds borrowed for them yet, and they will be borrowed here in the next few months. So is open projects meaning we have approved first
When
project?
the contract's approved, the work starts.
Well, that's a whole nother, contract approves may happen all over the place.
I understand.
So when I'm talking, Robin, when I show the expenditure and what I'm thinking is when you approve the list. So like if you approve the list May 18th, that means from May 18th, we have 4 years to close out all our projects.
I don't see that. I see, when you approve the list, you haven't expended a dollar.
Oh yeah, I haven't even started.
It's when you spend the first dollar. Is when the project really starts.
Yes, but the problem is you got to realize that list has 35 projects.
I hear you.
So if I go under that, we may close everything out within 2-3 years, because we spend a year. Well, the first dime that we spend is going to be on design services. So we got it. We can't hire an architect really until you've approved the funding. She won't let me. I can tell you that.
That's when the project starts.
Yeah, and so
when you expend the first dollar, that's when this project starts. That's not your plan.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
And that's why we need that's where we may have a little disconnect, and is that my thought is when you approve it, and that seems like a lot larger time frame than actually when we start spending it. That would be a management nightmare. I can just tell you on my side, just because there's so many projects. I like the cleanliness of when you approve it, I can keep track of that. And 4 years from then, she's going to shut the door on me and say, you can't spend that anymore. That's easy. On a management side, that's extremely easy for me to manage. If it's on a project by project level, then I may not start a project, actually the first funds, till 2 years after you approved it. Well, now you just gave me 4 years after that, so it may be open for 6 years, and I can't shut down that funding source until that one project is done. See,
So are you telling me that you borrow money for a project and it's sitting around waiting for you to expend it?
it's more complicated than that, probably. Tanya will tell you.
Yeah, wait a minute. Now it's pretty. Wait a minute. When you do the bond, you get the money. That's the date. That's when it starts. So when does, from the time you get the money in the bank, how soon is that money obligated?
Well, it depends on the project, but we fund, when I'm borrowing money this year, it's funding the approvals that you made last year at this time. So there's very little spending, or mostly design, and just only technology purchases for that first year. And then I'm borrowing, the bulk of what I'm borrowing is for the last summer's projects.
It's partially why you're approving now FY 2023 projects. So you're approving next
I
year's
understand
project.
approval, but you see that's not the way businesses work. That's not the way
Right.
government works.
Right.
When you start going to Congress and asking for appropriation, that's not the start of the project. The start of the project is when the funds are approved and when the funds are expended. That's when the project starts.
Yeah, and I think
Otherwise, you've got arbitrage. Otherwise, you're borrowing money that's just sitting there gaining interest. Right?
Yes, we have not had an arbitrage liability in many, many, many years.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we got a bigger problem that just raised its head. Oh man. I see where I see the complication that you're saying, but you gotta understand, we can't borrow money and put it in the bank and gain interest. We borrow money, it's just what you're doing in the referendum,
Right,
same thing.
right.
You can't do that.
Right. Oh, yeah, no, we're tracking, she's only borrowing money when, based on our need for that upcoming. But the referendum.
So you're having multiple bond issues for a year's worth of bonds? You're not borrowing the 20 million at one time?
I borrow the 20 million at one time.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
That's pretty shaky.
Well, it's offset against the interest costs of the borrowing, so there isn't a negative liability or a liability there. So we have arbitrage analysis every year. So there hasn't been a liability there.
Dick, let me Ingrid, did you want to say something?
I just have a question. We are not the only district that uses 8% funds for this kind of stuff. So what are do we know what other now I know Charleston, I'm pretty sure that Charleston doesn't do the bond borrowing because they have now the educational special purpose loss, the local sales tax, right? So I don't think they're issuing debt like we are anymore. And I don't know if I think more districts have moved to that model, but there's gotta be a lot of districts in South Carolina that are borrowing money for 8% projects. And I'm wondering, is there a standard across that we are out of line with, or is everyone kind of on this same page? And Mr. Colonel Guy is the first one to notice it.
So as far as Charleston goes, just so you know, they do borrow 8% funds. They're right now borrowing about, and I had the numbers exactly in here somewhere if I can find it real quick, about 40 million in 8%. And then their revenues that they get from the sales tax is about 45. So their total, and then they're upping theirs to the next round of borrowing, they're going to get 65 million a year in the sales tax, and they're still going to plan on borrowing, and I think about 20 million in 8%. So their 8% is about with us, but it's supplemented. Their total,
their sales tax take care of their capital.
Right. They have a whole lot larger pot to spend from proportionally to us based on their sales tax. And then it also funds their large capital. That's just their maintenance capital. Then they have their large capital on top of that. That's like new schools and all that. That's funded out of the sales tax. So the sales tax is a great way to fund. But anyway, we won't go there.
No. I was just wondering that other places are doing the same thing. Do we not know how other CFOs are borrowing money, and I'm sure, are they dealing with the same issues, or do they have a standard that we can look at and say, this is how other districts are doing it, so we don't fall into the pitfalls that Colonel Geyer is pointing out?
I can certainly contact some of my counterparts and talk to them about how I haven't done that yet.
Well, I
can certainly do that.
This is how I do everything. Like I'll do I go to Pinterest and I'm like, I can, and I replicate. Like this is sort of the Pinterest approach to debt management. Sorry, Colonel Geyer. It's a little odd, but I always look and see what other people are doing and see if we're in line with what they're doing.
So Robin, if you could go to that next slide, I think it is. No, go back one maybe. So I think the answer is that we're actually spending every year close to the amount we're borrowing. So it's on a year-to-year basis.
Staggered. I can see how that. I can see what you're saying, because you got to do the design work.
Correct. But at the same,
but when you play that first dollar in design, that's the start of the project.
So well, maybe we should continue this conversation and let Tanya and I put our heads together, and because I think I need to have a better understanding as well. I don't think it's as bad as you're thinking it is.
Okay.
But you're understanding, the good news is I think you're understanding my problem.
Yeah, I understand it.
Now, why I'm saying mine stretches out. And if we're wanting to put a limit on it, now we need to handle the financing to make sure that we're not letting money sit around. And I think the answer to that is it's not there is a little bit sitting around, but not near as bad as you think it is. But so my only issue was if we're going to put a limit, I want to have it be manageable, and that's why I was basing it on what you approved. Do we want to go back to that conversation?
Yeah, but
That might be a conversation to have.
that's another conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Mr. Smith?
When the time starts.
Right. Mr. Smith, is your hand still up? I'm sorry.
No, my hands is down.
Okay. All right. So I think that's be a good conversation to have. Common understanding of
When it starts.
when it starts. That sounds very crucial. Yeah, yeah. So, so I am not going to bring forth a motion on Tuesday because I do believe it needs to go into committee and have a further discussion, if not even another joint committee meeting, so that we all understand it. So I won't bring that motion forward as we were discussing about putting a timeline on it. Okay. What else is on your list?
That was
Anything?
it.
That was it.
We completed, so what well, I'll let you.
No, please.
I mean, we're bringing forward the 8% project list. That's going to be the version B. So that's the
5B.
only one we're going to put in board docs. We're not even going to bring
No.
A forward.
We just need
We're just
5B,
bringing B forward.
right?
We're going to include with it the E-rate funds will be rolled in as part of that. The use of contingencies in that 8%, so it's kind of understood. And that's really, and then, well, the Burroughs Avenue, we're going to bring in a later date.
At a later time. I'm going to mention it, but we're going to not have any
So
motion.
really, we'll only have one motion.
Right. And the two things will be in as David suggested.
And then y'all will figure out a way to have further conversation about the
Yeah,
start and stop of 8%.
right.
With the intent of putting something out there for a 4-year time limit.
Okay. So given that, are there any other comments by any of the board members or anyone in attendance? No, then I think that we can say this meeting is adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Everybody, thank you very much for your input. Greatly appreciate it.